You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 261.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Welcome to September as we dive in today with an interview with Mimi Dvorak Smith. But before we get started, are you a food or nutrition expert looking to write a cookbook, but you're unsure where to start, how to spend time, or what publishers are looking for? If so, I want to let you know about a free training that I have that covers common mistakes cookbook writers make, steps to make your work more appealing to publishers, and a publishing path you can choose if you do not want to spend your time or money editing, designing, or printing your book. You can access this on-demand training by registering at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. And within just 45 minutes, you are going to learn everything you need to know about how to use your time wisely, create a cookbook platform and concept, and write a proposal that publishers will love. So today on the podcast, I have an interview again with Mimi Dvorak Smith. Mimi is the author of Too Many Eggs, a collection of over 800 egg recipes and their fascinating history. What started as a journey ordering 25 chickens by mail ended up being a life with young chickens laying 24 eggs every day. So Mimi did what cooks do, and she started a notebook that contained recipes that she could make with her abundance of eggs. When Mimi's only sibling and brother died, her project moved front and center. She hired an editor, worked through the material, and ultimately wrote what would become this old-style recipe book for eggs. Only eggs. Recipes only for eggs, just 800, all 800 of them, complete with footnotes, side stories, and illustrations. This is an amazing interview about someone who had determination to write a single subject book, and I think you're going to really enjoy meeting Mimi Dvorak Smith. Hi, Mimi. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Hi there.
It's good to have you here. I can't wait to talk about your new book and your journey as a cookbook collector and now cookbook author. But before we dive in, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you do?
Okay, well, my name is Mimi Smith Dvorak, and this is the first cookbook I've written. Nothing like starting big. This is a 750-page single subject cookbook called Too Many Eggs. And I started it because I had too many eggs. You know, I live up on the Upper Peninsula of Upper Peninsula of Washington State. I live in Port Angeles. And I thought it'd be great to get chickens because I had chickens when I lived in Berkeley. So I figured, how hard is it? So I ordered 25 chickens from McMurray Hatchery, and they all showed up, and they were all hens, and they were a mess. And then finally they grew up and they went out to the thing. And I didn't realize that 25 chickens lay 24 eggs a day. So I gave as many eggs as I could to all my neighbors to the point where they were going, we don't need any more. So I would end up with just a refrigerator full of eggs. So I went through my cookbook collection. I've been collecting cookbooks since I was a kid. And it would be flipping through the pages going, that only uses 2 eggs. I need 12 eggs. And we could only eat so much angel food cake, and we could only eat so many scrambled eggs. Matter of fact, it got to the point where I was giving my scrambled eggs back to the chickens. I would cook them up and give them to the chickens to eat, which I thought was a perpetual motion machine. Yes. So it was, I started jotting down recipes, and I kept this big notebook. And so then that kind of mushroomed, and I started getting more involved with, what other egg recipes are there? So that turned into this book. And it was,
Well, I can say when I opened the box, when you sent me the book, I could not believe, first of all, just the heft of the book when I took it out of the box. And now, those of you that are listening, don't let this deter you, because I think this is an amazing single subject book. And it's, about eggs and all the recipes for cooking them. I don't know that there was any stone really left unturned.
There was one.
Well, did someone tell you, like, what is the one that's unturned?
I don't like ice cream that much. So there's no ice cream recipes in that book. And I feel terrible about it. So the next book will have 10 more pages.
Yeah. So when you say the next book, you're able to obviously, well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how you got published in a little bit. And we can talk about one of the benefits of the path that you took and what that means in terms of the second edition. But let's talk about eggs and why eggs, other than the fact that you had chickens that had eggs, you were collecting these recipes. But what was it about even wanting to have eggs and your lifestyle that led you down this path?
Well, about 30 years ago now, my middle son was looking to, he did some report on the food we eat. And at the time we were eating a normal American diet. We were eating, going to McDonald's and, packaged food and everything else. And he said, well, we need to cut certain things out of our diet. We need to get rid of this and this and this and this. Let's do it for 60 days and see what happens. So one of those things was, not having McDonald's, and which I had a real withdrawal from. So when he got into that, I started looking at the slow food movement and also Weston A. Price's nutrition stuff and Sally Fallon. And I got really interested in it. So one thing I noticed is after 60 days, I stopped having migraines because I had terrible migraines most of my life. My food bill dropped amazingly when I started cooking everything from scratch. And it just became kind of the family obsession. So we got really into this whole thing. Like at one point I made a cheesecake. I make the perfect cheesecake. I made my own cheese. I made my own sour cream. I made a pound cake and then dried it and made the crust. And I did it was like everything it was okay. But we started, really getting into buying things in bulk and buying, meat from farmers that specialized in heirloom cattle and heirloom animals. And that's when we decided, we were living in Berkeley at the time, to have chickens, even though it wasn't totally legal. So it just threw us on this path, and we became absolutely food obsessed. So in Berkeley, I had 2 chickens that were the illegal chickens. And I had a few ducks, and ducks, by the way, have lovely eggs. And then when I moved back to Washington State, I said, well, I've got, 7 acres here. Let's get a ton of chickens. So we did. It was all part of everything that we do. Right now, I eat in season. I eat locally. All my food is sourced from people within 20 miles where I live. Which is a little it's a little obsessive, but
and I think that if you're going to be into cooking things yourself and into scratch cooking, and you want to eat locally, knowing how to cook everything is a extremely important part of that. If you're going to because most of the time you're buying ingredients, you're not buying anything that's actually finished. So you're going to have to be able to do it. And when you talk about the eggs and the chickens and this whole, I think there are people here. We live in northern Kentucky outside of Cincinnati that have chickens in their backyard, people that are growing gardens. But what is it about this attraction to wanting to have chickens in our yard? And are the laws that are surrounding this something that is obviously probably legislated at the local level for everybody's town or city, correct?
Yes. And a lot of these laws have to be changed. If you remember back in the 40s, during the war, actually from World War I, World War II, it was encouraged for you to have your own chickens. So you could help the war effort by supporting yourself and feeding yourself. And then somehow in the 60s, the great time of no cooking, as I call it. The recipe books and everything from the 60s are just dreadful. But about the 60s and 70s is when we decided to start enacting all these laws, no poultry, no farm animals, you couldn't raise, some towns actually have gone so far as to say that you can't have vegetables in your front yard. You can't raise vegetables in your front yard. It has to be at a local level. And these egg laws, because I've looked at the laws all over the country, are all over the map. And I know in my town, we actually don't legislate one way or the other, but there's a push that people want to ban roosters. And I am really vocal about it. I think that we can do everything within reason, but I think having chickens and being able to feed yourself and raise your own food, it's what we're programmed to do. I mean,
yeah. And I think it's obviously we're kind of preaching to the choir a little bit with our interest in this topic of cooking and books about cooking, but I think it's a life skill that never ever lets us down. It doesn't matter whether you want to make something for dinner, or you need to take something to a friend who isn't feeling well, or you just want to take care of yourself from a nutrition perspective, take care of your community from shopping locally. Cooking fits in all of those categories. And I think cooking is fun. I find it very rewarding. And I do agree that it usually helps to save on the food costs and the food bill for your family or for yourself. Not as expensive as going out to eat.
It saves on waste too. Chickens will eat anything.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to go, okay, the kids didn't eat their peanut butter sandwich. Go give it to the chickens.
Yeah. My Aunt Eileen lived on a farm and she had chickens, and she had a little bucket that she kept. I think it might've been under the sink. And every evening that would be our job if we spent the night with her, would be to take this bucket out and just throw it over the fence for the chickens. So we don't have chickens here in our yard, but I did grow up with them. And I think it's one of the ingredients, if I go to a farmer's market, I always seek out is buying local eggs from somebody. Yep. And what I love about it is a lot of times it's like different colors of the shells, different hues, and then different sizes of the eggs. And they're not obviously sized and washed. So I think there are benefits to that as well. Can you talk a little bit about the washing of the eggs that happens when we buy them from the supermarket versus buying them from someone like you or having your own? There's a protective coating, I think, that is still there. Is that correct?
The bloom. Yeah. Commercial eggs, the biggest problem with them is they're raised in commercial grow operations, and the cages are stacked as high as you can see. And, they poop on each other. I hate to say it. They do that. And they're not running around. They're not acting like chickens. And farmers actually have to add a natto dye to the food source so that yolks have any color at all, because chickens' yolks are based on what they eat. So if your chicken's out running around the yard, it's eating grass, it's eating bugs, it's eating anything it can get its little beak on, you'll get intensely yellow or orange eggs. And there are people, I can't remember, it's a restaurant in New York New York State, that feeds their chickens these really deep red peppers to get their eggs red colored. So you can actually influence the chicken egg based on what you feed it, which was a bad experiment. So the thing with chicken eggs in general is that they are the bloom on them is a protective coating. It's a waxy coating. You don't want to wash it off. If you have your own eggs, you just clean them off with a moist rag. That keeps the shell from being as porous as it is, because the shell is porous. If you look at it under a microscope, it looks like a tangle of blackberry vines, wild blackberries. It's just it is porous. And what commercial guys do is, they dip them, they clean them, they put them into cold storage. So the egg that you're buying in the refrigerator could be as much as 9 months old, which is good and bad. However, that if there is any like E. coli or anything else that got in through that egg, it will get into this. You can get it. I mean, that's why we had a problem with salmonella with eggs. Yeah. So you're not going to have this kind of problem if you buy local chickens with the bloom still on the egg, local chicken eggs with the bloom still on the egg. And the fresher the egg, they have slightly different characteristics from an old egg, but they're certainly going to be eating out, running around, being pastured. They're going to be a lot better for you.
Yeah.
I probably didn't answer your question.
No,
but.
you did. So I think that bloom, and I think that bloom then protects it, and it just leads to a different type of egg. I also think the interesting thing about the commercial production versus if we have our own chickens is the light, and that
Yes.
light naturally changes over the course of the year, and the chickens stop laying as it starts to get darker and colder, whereas in a commercially produced egg environment, they're producing 365 days a year. The hens are always laying eggs.
Yeah. And chickens need that time off to, you just can't lay eggs all the time. I mean, they live longer, they're healthier, the eggs are healthier, the shells are harder if you let them go through a natural molt. So, and I don't know, it just, it's nice to watch chickens run around. They're little dinosaurs and they're really fun to watch. So as a backyard ornament, they're wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you found yourself with 16 dozen eggs in your refrigerator. You started this notebook. You were keeping track of things that you could make with your eggs, and you decided you wanted to publish this in a book. Is that correct?
I did.
Yeah.
Now, I had a background in writing books. My husband is a computer columnist, and he's an essayist. He wrote for a bunch of different computer magazines, and he got some book deals, and I would, deal with the contracts and all that. And then he realized I could write. So I ended up compiling and writing and editing and doing everything and dealing with the publishers for about 12 books. And then later I started writing occasionally for people doing ghostwriting. So I understand the whole publishing industry. So I did this in the wrong order. Ordinarily, you would do a proposal and then you'd sell the proposal for a nonfiction book. And then the publisher they'd assign you a developmental editor, and then they'd put you on a schedule, and then you'd produce this stuff, and then they'd edit it, and then it'd come back to you in proofs. And the process, you didn't have to worry about the layout or anything. I did this completely backwards. I wrote the book.
Oh.
I wrote the book because I'm not a cookbook author. Yeah. I wrote the book because originally it was just going to be a gift for the family.
Yeah.
And then it kind of got overboard.
Let's just preface this by saying also, when you write fiction, you do write the book. You submit the fiction book to them. But with nonfiction, like a cookbook, it is the reverse of that. You're exactly right. So your thought process was probably just based on what you were used to in terms of the type of books that you had worked on before. Yes.
And I had a friend who was an excellent copywriter, and I would once I started assembling it as a book, I started sending my chapters so that she would read them and she'd give me feedback, and she'd ask me questions like, what did you do here? And, so every week I would send her a new chapter and she would go through them. And that was nice. I mean, I think that helped a lot because it's really hard to write in a vacuum. And without having a publisher behind me, I had to have something where I was getting feedback because, and to keep me motivated.
Yeah.
So once the book was completely done and reorganized and organized again, the book looks very different from my original copy from what came out. I tried to sell it. I tried to.
So did you end up going back then and writing a proposal for it?
I wrote 4 different proposals.
Wow.
I wrote proposals in 4 different styles. I begged people for copies of what cookbook proposals look like so I could copy it. And I did that over and over again with different styles and comparing myself. I mean, everything you do, you look at all the other books in the industry, you say what else has been published, you say how well it sold. And the response I got, I had an agent. I actually got an agent, an old friend of mine. And the problem was there's no pictures. And I was like, well, I can put illustrations in it. And they're like, no, there's footnotes. There's no pictures. It's too big. And I got a lot of it's too big.
Yeah.
It's too ambitious. Nobody needs it. And the other thing too, is I've mixed in a lot of food history because I love food history. And everyone's like, well, you're off topic. You're not talking about cooking. You're talking about, everything else under the sun. And I'm like, it's too conversational in your style. So that was the feedback I got from publishers. And it was always thanks, but no thanks. And it's too big. I kept getting that. And now I understand why they're saying it, because what we ended up doing is I had to divorce myself from the layout because the layout I wanted would have a lot of illustrations in it. And so my daughter, Jay, and I talked about it, and she goes, I know you need to get, you need a good layout person. So I got a layout person. It was dreadful. It didn't look good. So I said, well, I obviously have no eye for this. So I've got my daughter to find layout people, choose one, and do the negotiation on that. And she's the one who picked all the woodcut illustrations. She's the one who picked the cover. I had to kind of give up what I was envisioning, but she did a beautiful job.
Yeah. How do you feel about it? I mean, because sometimes I think that's true. We do have a vision for what we think the book's going to look like. But if we're going to have someone help us design it, we do turn that over to them. How do you like the way it turned out?
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful too.
Yeah.
I don't know what your original vision looked like, but I mean, it's very cohesive looking in terms of the way the illustrations and the font style and the cover, and all goes together.
Yes. And it's a beautiful book. It is not, if I had done it myself, my weakness is I don't see font sizes and stuff. I don't have a personality. I don't think about, oh, I like that font size. I like that font,
Yeah.
It's just not me. She has more of an eye for that. So I just said, well, let's turn it over, because I can write the book. I'm the author, but I've never had to do any of that other stuff. So I foisted it off on her. So she started a publishing company.
Okay. And did she actually design it, or she had someone that she worked with?
She had
within the publishing company, she had a designer that she worked with.
A designer group in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
Or Mill Valley. She actually solicited from a bunch of different book designers after looking at their covers, and she picked the people who she liked the covers that they'd done the most. And of course, I don't remember the name of them because I didn't deal with them. But we went back and forth on it. I think it's in there.
Yeah, I looked on the copyright page. It's called Book Designed by the Book Designers.
Exactly. How easy.
Yeah.
And they were excellent. And, And then
obviously what they do and what they know. And, for a book this big, and it's also 8.5 by 11. It's not a smaller trim. I think it's 8.5 by 11, or is it?
Maybe 8 by 10, maybe 8
Something
by 11.
Like that. Yeah. But anyway, it's, I think that you probably made the right call on that as the author. When you're dealing with that much material, sometimes it is good just to let part of it go to somebody else to figure out how they can make it.
We did take out all my appendices, and we decided not to do an index because it'd be kind of stupid, because eggs would just be every page in the book.
Well, I think right. And I did wonder about the index, but I guess that it would have maybe just eliminated the egg category, like index other things. Maybe, I don't know. It's a toss up.
Finding an indexer is a whole nother adventure. I was, by the time I got through with this book, I was done with it. Right now, I really don't like eggs that much, honestly.
Yeah. And that happens. I think sometimes when we write books, it's we are just ready to not even think about it or work with the material for a while.
Well, I actually cooked, except for 3 or 4 recipes I can think of. I cooked every recipe in that book because I was on a tear. I mean, it got to the point where the kids were going, "Really? Eggs again?"
Yep. That's right. We're in the middle of a project. We're going to cook a lot of eggs. And that's what you do. And I think that people that want to write cookbooks have to know that that's kind of part of it, because I think as the author, there's a responsibility almost to say to your readers, here, I made this for you, and everything in here works. And I've tried it, and I'm not saying there aren't any mistakes, but to the best of my ability, I know that this is an excellent collection of egg recipes, which it is.
Yes. Well, now publishing a book is not for the faint.
No.
Finding a printer is a challenge. Making sure that you get a good deal that you can live with, and then warehousing them.
Yeah.
So my daughter's garage is full
of books. And this leads us to the next thing that you mentioned about perhaps adding another 10 pages, some more material on the next printing. when you self-publish, you can do that, right? You
Yes.
can add more material. You can fix the manuscript. But you do want to go through your first round of printing, I'm sure, before you actually do that.
Right. Well, that's challenging. Actually, I want to wait, and I'll probably add 2 chapters just to add it because I know that I've forgotten things.
Yeah.
But we've had a lot of arguments about that in the family. Like, when do I do the next round and what do I do? One of the things that we did with the publishing company is the book is free. There's a free downloadable PDF on our website at toomanyeggs.com. And the reason for that is because I know there's a lot of people who have chickens and need a recipe book with lots of egg recipes, and a $48 book price is steep.
Yeah.
So, and, it's like, if you have the desire, just go download it. We ask for a donation if you find value in it. And that's mostly because I think it's like, I don't like going to websites that I have to pay a price to get in. I don't like paywalls. I think it should be, if you find value in it, great, download it, send me a couple of dollars. It's fine. This kind of open source model is really something that's, I think it's a value. I mean, I think people, you don't have to worry about bootlegging my book. Go get it yourself.
Yeah, right.
Print
So
it out, put it in it.
Yeah, and I'll link to that in the show notes. And what if someone wants a hard copy of the book? It's available.
It's available at many bookstores around the country now. It's available on Amazon. You can buy it directly from Gateview Publishing. So you can go to toomanyeggs.com and order it. And it's everywhere now. I'm trying. I actually wrote down, I had a card that I had printed.
Yeah. Like a postcard.
It's a postcard that I had printed that says where you can get the book, that is available on Ingram. And I actually developed a list of every single independent bookstore in the country. And I hand wrote the addresses and sent them to them. And hand notes, because some of the bookstores around the country are just the cutest things. They're really neat.
Yeah.
And, that's helped. And it's something that a publisher wouldn't do anymore if I went to a real publisher.
Right.
So
then they're able to order the book because it's listed on Ingram. They can order it into their bookstore. So let's say it's a bookstore in Portland. I mentioned Portland in the beginning of the interview. They can actually order it and have copies of it in their store.
Yes. Now the downside from the publisher's point of view is we only make 60 cents a book, but it's available on Ingram. It's also in England. It's available on Waterstone. I think it is. You can order it through there. We're working on, I have 2 more translations of it. I have a translation in French and German.
Oh, nice.
So we're going to be publishing it somewhere there someday soon.
Nice.
It's that part, the publishing part of it is it's a lot more work than writing a book.
And the actual, getting the word out about the book, because that's how I heard about it. Was I received your email. Would you be interested in taking a look at the book and then having me on the podcast? So you did a lot of the legwork yourself. But I think that people need to know, even in traditional publishing, frontlist books do get some attention from their publisher, but I've heard it's maybe 60 days for most authors, unless you're like a really big name. So I think it's kind of a misnomer that publishers do the marketing for you. They don't.
Well, we did. My husband's biggest book was this giant book called, I don't know, Dvorak's Guide to Telecommunications or something. And we did a lot of the marketing ourselves. I mean, we hired there used to be book publicists that you had back then that you could get that would help you get on different shows. But a lot of it was it was going out and talking to bookstores, and that's what I did. So it's not really that different. Book publishers do not give you much support, and especially not in this world. So you do have to do a lot of things yourself, and you have to develop your own mailing lists, and you have to just put the time in.
Yeah. You also mentioned something kind of clever. Of course, you independent bookstores, cooking stores, and then you also looked at places like farm stores and hatcheries that carry books.
Yes.
How's that going?
Quite well, actually. I have contacted many hatcheries, and a few of them are interested in carrying it. I've contacted all the big farm stores, and the question is, many want to just have it in the spring, so we'll have to reapproach them in the spring. I'm also going to chicken clubs all around the country because there's all kinds of chicken clubs. I have a mailing list I've developed to farmers markets, specifically people who sell eggs.
Mm-hmm.
So that is going to roll out in another few months. It's just like, I think this is a hobbyist book. It's a crazy person's book. Let's face it. People who are into food and farmers markets and owning chickens. And
yeah. And if there's people that are listening that don't own chickens, but you love cookbooks, which a lot of you do, and you like the idea of a single subject cookbook all about eggs, it's a great, fun read. I've sat down with this book probably 12 or 15 times. And it sat on the counter in our kitchen, and my son was home from college because before he went back, and his girlfriend was here. I mean, we were all just like looking through this book because it has everything from, scrambled eggs to flan to kugels to savory custards, meringues, salad dressings, egg sandwiches. I mentioned before we started the recording, but the whole section about pickled eggs has me fascinated now with pickling eggs because I'm into pickling vegetables, and you can do it with the shell on or the shell off. I didn't know that.
Yeah. The vinegar will dissolve the shell.
Yeah.
Actually, recently I've started pickling quail's eggs.
Oh, wow.
And quail's eggs are really interesting because you boil them for very few minutes, but you boil them, and then you soak them in vinegar so that the shells dissolve, because the shells are so hard you'll wreck the egg. So you let the shells dissolve, and then you just peel off the little membrane. And if you pickle quail's eggs, they're delicious in martinis. Oh my God, forget the olive. Let's just do a pickled quail egg. I actually have quite an extensive chapter on egg drinks too. So,
yeah.
Including an eggnog that you can make.
I made the, speaking of my son coming home from college, there's one in here for a Bloody Mary type drink with the raw egg in it. And I think you refer to it almost, I can't think what the name it is, but like it's almost like drinking or eating a raw oyster. Yes. Because you're drinking this little shot of like Bloody Mary, and then all of a sudden you get the raw egg, and you just like have to pretty much throw it back and drink it.
Well, that goes
like
back.
An oyster.
That goes back to the old,
like hangover drinks.
Well, that or an egg in your beer. An egg in your beer was a stout ale with an egg in it, and that was breakfast because that was just liquid bread and an egg. I go into a lot of different recipes that are a little more obscure.
So I think that's one thing that's really fun about it. So it's obviously in depth. There is some material you said that you want to add the next time, which would be, did we say this when we were recording a chapter or some recipes for ice cream?
Yeah. But I think you could probably use all of the custard recipes or the. I think a good cooked custard would also be excellent as an ice cream, but I don't really like ice cream, so that's a problem. So
and I think that there's room if you want to add it. This book does have over 700 pages. How many recipes?
Oh, like 810 or something. Yeah, a lot of recipes, including actually the fun one. I really got into making mayonnaise for a while. And the reason is because it's like everyone told me all my life, oh, it's too hard to make. Even my grandmother, oh, mayonnaise is too hard. And then I discovered that it's not mayonnaise is hard to make. It's the Hellmann's company promoted that as part of their advertising, that it's so hard to make mayonnaise. Why would you burden yourself with it? Matter of fact, there were old wives' tales that if a woman was on her period, she shouldn't make it, won't set. And it's like fresh mayonnaise is delicious.
I mean, if that's where it came from, it worked, because I don't know very many people that make mayonnaise.
And it's not hard.
No.
It's just go slow, be patient. I mean, it's like.
And you have 27 beautiful variations for different things to add to mayonnaise, including the recipe for the Kewpie mayonnaise, the Japanese style mayonnaise, which is so popular in that squishy bottle when you buy it at the supermarket.
It just has more sugar.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and then the old recipes for salad dressings, people got away from it using raw eggs because of the whole problem with salmonella. But if it's a local egg, there's not much. I mean, I've eaten so many raw eggs at this point.
Yeah. Is there really any risk if they're coming from your own backyard? I suppose there's always a risk, but
there's always a risk. But
yeah,
if it's fresh out of the chicken's butt, no, I don't think so.
I wouldn't think so either.
Yeah,
I wouldn't think so either.
Chicken berries, yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, I think
there's a risk to eating it. You can't even get. I mean, if you're going to trust McDonald's to clean their machines properly, I mean, you're taking a risk there every time you go. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, back when I was young, my mom would make cake or cookies. She'd say, now don't taste the batter because of the eggs. But now there's all this new information coming out about the salmonella also in the flour, and that it may be a bigger source of this part of the salmonella risk than actually the eggs are.
Yes.
So I kind of find that fascinating when we get into dry goods and spices, and especially some spices, if you're putting them in things that you would never heat or cook anyway.
Yeah.
I think that it's a whole nother reason to really know where our food is coming from and to
absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah.
I mean, the fact that we trust minimum wage unhappy workers to make our food, that's putting a whole lot of trust in a lot of things. So
yeah, and I've said this on the podcast before. I think I also was attracted to cooking from not just the perspective of feeding myself, feeding my family, the nutrition perspective, but once I had little kids, I actually used cooking as an excuse to slow down at the end of the day and to be present in our kitchen. I don't know where they could have been milling around doing anything at that time. And it varied depending on how old they were. They could have been right at my feet or, off in another room. But I did intentionally use cooking for that. And it is something that was just a real touch point in our lives and in our day. Mm-hmm. And it sounds so old-fashioned now just sitting here saying that, but I think that it is extremely important. It's highly valuable. And people like you that still believe in that, because I know that they're out there. People that listen to this podcast perhaps still believe in that. Time is really all we have anyway. People say I don't have enough time, but I mean, that's really all we have when you think about it.
And you can eat junk food or you can eat good food. And one is, you are what you eat again. Just like with chickens. Yeah. My grandmother was an excellent cook. And she would she made cookies for me that are in that recipe book that were made with hard-boiled eggs. They're hard-boiled egg cookies. They're very German style of cookie because she was very German. And the reason she'd let me have those cookies is because she'd say, well, you can either eat junk or you can eat some protein with your food because you're a picky eater. So she'd give me cookies with hard-boiled eggs in it. What a great idea. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, no, you can't have any cookies. Don't eat a cookie. You'll ruin your dinner. She'd go, here, you're not going to eat your dinner anyway. But that whole thing, making the food was suddenly considered to be a burden. The late 40s, my mother's generation, late 40s through the 50s through the 60s. Oh, making food is a burden. You've got other things to do with your time. You don't want to toil in the kitchen all day. And if you collect recipe books, you see how horrible the cookbooks are from this, especially the 60s and 70s. I mean, they're just dreadful. You open up any of those junior league cookbooks and they're full of Jell-O recipes with stuff floating in it. And ambrosia with take a jar of whipped marshmallows and a can of, fruit salad. And that was cooking. It was assembling. It wasn't cooking.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that people are getting more back into that my kids are talking about having, potluck parties at their house, where people bring a recipe. I think that we lost a lot of our culture when we decided that cooking was too much work. I don't think it's too much work. I think it reflects, it has soul, it's authentic.
Yep.
So
I completely agree. And I think that something as simple and as, eggs are, I think, they're just a beautiful food. And when you see them in your refrigerator or you buy them or you have access to them, particularly, like I said, if it's maybe an eggshell that's a different color, and the fact that you can cook it in so many different ways, it is really, truly, when the nutrition space, it's called the perfect protein, the albumin that's around an egg.
yep.
And I think that there's a lot to learn about cooking just with this one simple ingredient.
Well, the number of folds in a chef's hat, the toque, is based on, it was the old thing, is that the number of folds he had in his hat was how many ways he could cook an egg.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that was, and like, if you go back to the really old, the master chefs, like, Ferdinand, whatever, Leroy, the king. I can't remember names right now. Anyway, he talked about, that the only thing that's perfect is a perfectly fried egg, and how he would interview chefs for his restaurant is he'd go cook me an egg, just fry it up, go cook me an egg. And if they cooked it too fast or they didn't cook it with enough, butter, or they, all the stuff, he'd go, no, you're not ready for my kitchen yet. And I think that that's kind of interesting that there's these, eggs, and that's just it. There's no perfect way to cook an egg. You go from the Spanish fried egg, which is an egg basically poached in olive oil, cooked quickly, to, the coddled eggs. I mean, it's like you can cook eggs with all different kinds of heat and all kinds of different devices. It is a fascinating subject from that perspective, which is why I got so crazy about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you also collect cookbooks.
I do.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about your cookbook collection.
Well, my mother couldn't cook to save her life. I mean, we had pork chops that were basically cooked so well that they were cardboard in consistency. And she cooked, but she didn't like cooking. So we moved to Iran when I was about 10 years old, because my dad was a marine engineer and he was on the Persian Gulf. So we stayed in Iran, and we stayed in a hotel in Tehran for many months before we got a place to live. And I would go down to the kitchen because I was given free run of this hotel. And the chef was this Frenchman who was great. And he was trying to learn English, and I learned kitchen French. And I got really fascinated. He let me do a little prep work. I was the kitchen rat, basically, is what he called me. And it was like this whole new world. So when I got back to the United States, I started going to junk stores, and I started finding old cookbooks. And my mother would just be like, why do you want that thing? So the first book that I got was a Mrs. Lincoln's cookbook, the Boston Cookery. And I read it from cover to cover several times. And then my mother just gave me her old cookbook. So I have A Joy of Cooking that I've had forever. It's the first edition. Mm-hmm. That was her mother's. And then I just started, wherever I would see cookbooks, in thrift stores or old bookstores, I would just buy them. And I really was fascinated with the really old ones, the ones from the late 1800s, early 1900s, especially for the tips in back, like, you can clean your clothing with, some incredibly toxic chemical. How great. But I would read the cookbooks, and it would bring up more questions. So the more questions it would bring up, the more cookbooks I would seek out to try to get answers to these questions. And at a point when I finally moved out of my parents' house when I was 17, 18, I had about 100 cookbooks at that point. And then it's only gotten worse, because then I started getting interested in cookbooks. Restaurant cookbooks were really a fascination for me. And then, so like I have the one from the woman in New York who had an omelet shop. All she did was omelets. And then I have cookbooks from, Southern ones and Northern ones. And then I started getting into cookbooks that were very specialty, like crockpot cookbooks, because I thought those were really funny. And then I started buying I still have a huge collection of Urban League ones, the women's clubs that would do the spiral bound books, which are mostly not that great. And then I started finding old cookbooks that were journals from women, because people would sell these at garage sales and I could never understand it. Oh yeah, it's grandma's recipes, and it'd be all handwritten, beautiful recipes, usually World War II recipes. So I would buy those. And at some point, my mother gave me her mother's recipes, which were very funny to read because it'd be, take 5 cents of cardamom and pound it well. And I had to, it was a math problem for me. How much was 5 cents of cardamom when she wrote this? Out of everything, my very favorite cookbook is still The Joy of Cooking by the Rombauer, because it's fun to read. It's conversational. I feel like I know the woman. So that's, it's lovely.
No pictures.
No pictures. And I don't really like the pictures because it makes me feel really self-conscious. When I look at pictures in the food porn cookbooks, I'm like, I'm never going to.
Well, I don't know really over time how well photos age in a book.
Oh,
not very well.
No,
right. They might look good for a while, but I think that even if we think that it's just the food, I think the style of photography changes. The props obviously change. The cameras, they change. And I think that sometimes photos can tend to date a book.
And you have to remember that they heavily use a lot of urethane on top of that food to make it look so pretty.
Yeah. And I don't know if it leads people really to an honest visual assessment of what the food would actually look like. Did you use your collection to find egg recipes for your book?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I went through every book. I still go through all the books and look at egg. That's the first thing I turn to when I get a new old cookbook. I went through and I would systematically go, that only uses 2 eggs. Oh my God, I can't use that. And then it would be, well, it uses 8. We'll try this recipe. So yeah, I would go through everything. And it was amazing how many similar recipes. Well, that's what got me, is the variations, which is, if it's been put in an egg, it's in a cookbook somewhere.
That's right. So what about your cookbook collection? How do you like to keep your cookbooks organized?
I start with I have one wall that is just organized with the oldest cookbooks. And then we go through the ones I use the most in the next bookshelf. And then I have the ones that I really am only keeping because they have the word cookbook in the name. And then there's the new ones. They kind of just stack everywhere throughout the house because I'm in the process of reading about 5 or 6 of them right now. So yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's neat. I always like to hear how people keep them organized.
Well, if you use them, they don't stay organized very well.
That's true. I have a shelf in my kitchen of ones that I use a lot.
Yeah.
And then of course, if Mimi's on video, she can see the ones that are behind me, and I'll refer to these, but the ones that I use and I reach for the most are upstairs. And a couple of them are my own, and then a couple of them are not. I just think it's interesting how we have favorites. I've had yours in the kitchen. I made the shakshuka. I think that's how it's pronounced one night, which is the spiced tomato sauce with the baked eggs in it. Is very good. And I want to try a strata actually over the weekend. With the bread and the eggs and whatever you want to put it.
I love the Scotch eggs. I never knew about them, and they're the best.
And there's a couple of different varieties or variations of what you might pack around the egg.
Besides sausage,
correct.
Yeah. No, I know, that's great. Actually, recently I was reading an old Chez Panisse cookbook by Alice Waters, and I was totally baffled by it because it was talking about flavoring the truffle flavored eggs. And I was like, I didn't know about this. I mean, I knew how I tried to flavor eggs, but this is, you put an egg with some truffle in a closed jar or a closed container, and you let it sit for a few days. And the truffle smell is so pungent, it'll flavor the egg. So, of course, I'm going to eat an egg now. Unbelievable. I never knew about this.
And then the truffle, it actually goes through the porous shell
and it flavors
into the egg. And when you cook with the egg, then the truffle flavor is imparted into the dish that you're making.
So I made a custard. For my egg, and it was an incredible flavor. And then once I figured out that it really did work, because I was a little highly suspicious of this. I sliced up the truffle and put it in, and it was a delicious little, like, in between course little. I tried to flavor eggs the other way by feeding chickens a huge amount of garlic.
Did it work?
Oh yeah.
Did
And
it?
yeah, and I wasn't too pleased. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also, in the pickled eggs, there's some recipes for smoking eggs where you don't hard boil them, you cook them on the barbecue and smoke them. And then when they get hard enough, you crack the shell so it gets the smoke into it. And I found that to be really, I kind of wanted to play with that a little bit more, but I'm not really all that fond of pickled eggs.
Yeah. Well, so if anybody is, again, interested, you go to tooManyEggs.com. You can order the book from Mimi. You can go to bookstores and order it, or you can download the PDF, because Mimi wants everyone to have access to this book if they want it. Yes. Well, one last question. If anybody's listening that is interested in writing a cookbook of their own, I don't know if you have a bit of advice for them.
Be ready to have your garage full of books.
Or your daughter's garage.
Exactly. I did the perfect way to do it.
Yes.
It's interesting. I'm sure what we'll do is we'll do a book on our adventures of publishing this book and getting it out in the world. So it's interesting.
Yes. And I think your marketing tips were good. There are a lot of things that you can do to help market and promote your own book. And again, that's something that we're all called on to do when we are cookbook writers.
Well, it's like the other thing with if you do have your book at bookstores, especially local bookstores, you need to go stop by the local bookstore and chat with them. And you need to face out your book, meaning if it's on a bookshelf, you make it so not just the spine is seen, but the front of the book is seen. And most cookbooks, most bookstores don't have a problem with you doing a face out, or you just don't ask them.
Yeah. No, that's right. You go in and you just like arrange it so that yours is face out.
Exactly.
I do it all the time.
I know, but no one tells you this when you're first an author, that you can go do this and no one will complain. They might turn it back as soon as you leave, but it was that way for a few minutes.
Yeah. I find most of the time bookstores, they're places where my books are for sale, are very happy to meet the people that write them.
Absolutely they are.
And especially because they own a local shop. They want to stay in business. They want people to come to their store, and bookstores. I think independent bookstores are actually becoming a little bit more like community centers, and a lot of great things going on at bookstores. So visit them and go support them. Sorry about that. My cat just laid on my microphone. Go support them, and then also, talk to them and let them know that you're the author of the book, and they love that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep. A lot of them like events, so
that's right.
Lost so many. About half of them went out of business.
Yeah.
So the ones that are remaining really need support.
Right. Well, it's been great to meet you today, Mimi, and talk to you about your book. Why don't you, again, any other place people can connect with you online, or is the website the main place?
If you email to, I think it's hello@tooManyEggs.com, I will get back to you. I'm, any questions or anything. If you buy the book, review it on Amazon, because that's always wonderful.
Yep.
Even if you didn't buy it there, they'll let you review it there. Helpful tip for authors.
Right.
No, I don't really, I do not have, we do have an Instagram page and a Facebook page and all that, but that I leave up to the publisher, to my daughter, to deal with, because I'm writing other things.
Right.
Yep.
All right. Well, it was great to have you on the show today. I wish you all the best with your book. And again, it's Too Many Eggs. And if you are interested in a single subject book that has a lot of great things to read, a lot of recipes for eggs, this is the book for you.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for having me. That was great. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
I will. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.